Everybody. So welcome to House Calls, the podcast. Today we are interviewing Clara Cecil, who is in Oxford, and that's not the one in Mississippi. That's across the pond in England.
Oh, you mean Maryland?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot there's an Oxford, Maryland. Yeah. So she wrote the book, It Starts with a Step. And is very interested in walking. She wrote that book right around the time she was finishing college, I believe. It's a great book. And she also has an interest in regenerative farming. So Matt and I are huge walking advocates, but we don't know much about regenerative farming, but we do like to eat healthy food. So I'm really excited about this, and I think we're going to learn a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to learn how we can walk to a regenerative farm and get really healthy food. That's what this is all about.
And I think that I'll try to really, really sit back and listen and try to not interrupt, especially her, a little bit you.
Fair enough. If you can do it, anybody can do it. Let's all
I do
try.
have a remote control, though, that I think I can shut your mic off from here. So if you're trying to say something, we'll see how it goes.
All right, let's see how it goes. Well, let's say
here's Clara.
Yeah, let's say hi to Clara.
Hey everybody, so welcome to House Calls, the podcast. Today we are talking to Clara Cecil, who is the author of It Starts with a Step. Matt and I are both avid walkers and big believers that walking is key to health. Clara also has some interest in regenerative farming, which Matt and I don't know much about, so I'm excited to hear about this. But to start off, Clara, where are you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So currently I'm calling in from across the pond. I'm in Oxford in the UK, where I'm currently in grad school studying for a master's in sustainability. Am I your first international guest?
Yeah, exactly. You are. Yeah. Well, Bermuda. We did have Bermuda.
Yes. First one across the ocean, though.
But thank you for making some time. So tell us what's going on and how you ended up in Oxford.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And I think it's great that you're making the ties between kind of food, health, and walking, which are some of my very favorite topics.
It sounds like we've done this all for you to get ready for this one moment.
Amazing. Yeah, so I've been in Oxford for the past year doing a master's in sustainability, and we're focused on kind of the intersection of business and how business has the opportunity to contribute to a more sustainable economy. And I've gotten the chance to get involved in some farming projects while I'm here, getting in touch with the local Oxford food system. So kind of the history that got to me to this point is my family has roots in farming starting in southern Maryland. So my dad's grandparents were farmers, so were my mom's, and they kind of shepherded their community through the Great Depression, and were responsible for generating a lot of food during that period. But growing up as a kid in suburban Maryland, I didn't really have the same experience. I was growing up in suburban Haven and knew that I could go to the grocery stores to get food, but didn't really have experience with knowing where my food was coming from. So I ended up studying business at Georgetown in college and got to know a little bit more about food supply chains and where food comes from and kind of the complex system that's behind how food gets on our plate. And I just became fascinated with all of the dimensions that are part of how food gets from where it's grown to how it gets to us.
What was your major at Georgetown?
I was studying marketing and operations.
That sounds to me very capitalistic, and then you're talking sustainability and things, which is another side of it. So it's a pretty neat dynamic that you have going on there.
Yeah, I think my mentality was that if business is going to be part of the problem, I wanted it to be part of the solution, and thinking about ways that we might be able to use business to contribute to a more sustainable food system and better planet and society.
Great. So before we get down to that, at what stage did you write the book, and how did you get into walking?
So when I was in college, I took a class that was on entrepreneurship, and our professor had a really great mindset around it. And he said, look, you're going to take this entrepreneurship class. Usually you create a pitch deck and you come up with this really great startup that you want to start but never do. So he thought that the way for us to actually get the experience of being an entrepreneur would be to start and write a book to the end. So we had 3 months where basically we had to do a bunch of cold outreach, and we got to interview different people in our subject matter. And then we, in those 3 months, actually wrote the book, and it ended up being an amazing project to be a part of. So I had always really enjoyed walking. I studied abroad in Paris when I was in college, and this actually connects to one of your other podcast guests, Steve Brown. So when I was in Paris, I was obsessed with exploring the city. It was something that, coming from more of a suburban environment, I wasn't used to just being able to go out and kind of walk anywhere and see the entire city. So I ended up walking between 20 and 30,000 steps every day that I was there, and was just obsessed with getting to see different parts of the city. And then by the time that I was about halfway through my study abroad experience, I broke my foot because I was walking too much. So my French host family ended up taking me to a French doctor who didn't speak any English, and they basically said, "You've got 2 weeks left in your summer study abroad program. It's not worth us treating you here, so just wait until you get back to your doctors in the US." So as soon as I got home, I ended up going to see Dr. Brown, and he said, "Yeah, indeed, you do have a stress fracture, and you probably shouldn't have been walking that much." So that was a good lesson in moderation. And
Right.
And to wind that back, Matt, that was our weekly medical moment, is that she used the term fracture and the term break. And luckily, I explained to Matt a couple days ago that they're the same thing. So now everybody is on the same page. We know exactly what was going on with Clara's foot.
I could have diagnosed that.
How's walking different in Europe than here? They're more of a walking culture, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess it depends on the part of Europe and the part of the US. So I lived in DC for a while, which I would argue is one of the most walkable cities in the US. Living in Oxford has been really wonderful because it's a very kind of tight-knit community. There, you can cross the entire city by foot in probably 30 to 40 minutes. So everything that I need is very much accessible by walking. I can go to the grocery store. I can meet up with friends. I can go for a walk in the meadow that is right outside of my house that has cows and horses and access to kind of the English countryside. So it's been an awesome experience to be here and kind of see that side of walkability. And it's a reminder of some of the things that could be a little bit better about the way that the US does walking and walkability.
It's funny. I was thinking about this 5 years ago. I had shoulder surgery, and in August, and so I couldn't do the normal activities that I wanted. So I started doing what I was calling these adventure walks. And in our neighborhood here, one goal was to walk in front of every house here. And then when back in Baltimore, I would go on like these 6-mile walks. I'd walk to physical rehab and come back, and it kind of really helped me understand that's a great way to clear your mind. We talked about it earlier in the week with Heron Dixon. He doesn't listen to anything when he walks because he just wants to appreciate his surroundings. But when I was doing it, I was listening to stuff, and then I was being quiet, and it's just such a slower pace, obviously, but in all aspects. And it really allows you to kind of appreciate the moment and what's around you. So with what you're doing over there in Oxford, I'm sure that's the same sense.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think I'm usually guilty of either listening to a podcast or talking.
As long as it's ours, we're good. You're good.
I'm addicted to distraction in that way, I guess. But yeah, it definitely ties into some of the benefits that I saw in my book of walking. So I broke it down into the physical benefits. So thinking about like what you were talking about, just the ability to have more activity, and it's a low impact and more accessible way to get around. And for a lot of people can kind of be a way to integrate working out into your daily routine. Then I think the mental health benefits are really interesting. There are a lot of studies that show there's a lower rate of depression and anxiety in people who are walking. And there was also a study out of Stanford that showed that there's a higher likelihood to be creative if you've gone for a walk. So they studied 3 different groups of people. One had just sat down and did a creative brainstorming exercise. The other had gone for a walk and then sat down and did the same creative brainstorming exercise. And then the third group went for a walk and stayed walking. And the results were amazing. It showed that whether you had gone for a walk and sat down or whether you had gone for a walk and stayed walking, your creative activity in your
You can see
brain
it.
was really ignited. And I think that's an awesome learning. I usually try to go for walks before I have exams or any kind of big presentation.
There's also studies that show it's not just the steps. So some people, when you say, "Oh, why don't you try walking?" They're like, "Oh, I'm on my feet all day at work, or I walk all day at work."
Mm-hmm.
But that is not the same as just chilling out and either walking disconnected or listening to music or listening to a podcast on your own as a fitness activity or a leisure activity. It does have a different psychological benefit. So it's not just the steps. The steps aren't all that matters. It's the freedom of your mind that can happen while you're walking.
So, Ty and I have, past couple of years have gone on, walks a lot. A
Mm-hmm.
lot. I mean, they're therapy, but we are very creative and very funny when we walk. Then we get here and we're like, duh, I don't know. We have got nothing. So Ty, we should really put this as we walk.
So that's called the Mutual Admiration Society.
It
And
is.
I am in a lot of relationships like that where we just build each other up and we make ourselves way cooler than we actually are. But Matt, can we get back to walking?
Oh, okay. But I was only saying when we walk. That's the only time we're like that.
So and you mentioned this in your book, what are some of the challenges of finding walking areas in a rural community versus a city?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, like we were talking about a little bit before, cities in the US tend to be designed a little bit differently than cities in Europe might. So, there aren't always sidewalks, there aren't always room for pedestrians to walk around. Cars tend to travel at pretty high rates of speed in cities in the US, so it makes it more dangerous to walk. So, those are some of the kinds of challenges that pedestrians might face in urban areas. And then in rural areas, there's kind of the same issue of lack of sidewalks. There might be more space to kind of roam and go through the woods or uncharted territory. But a lot of the studies that have been done on rural communities show that a lot of people rely on their cars to get around and are really just driving from kind of parking lot to parking lot and might not have time in their day to do kind of more leisurely activities like walking. I think a really interesting case study of the difference between walking in the US and Europe is a city called Utrecht in the Netherlands. Are you familiar with
I am
that
not.
spot? It's like 45 minutes outside of Amsterdam. And in the 1970s, they basically gutted one of the canals that ran all the way around the city. And it was in the name of making room for more cars and making sure that there was less traffic in the city for people who were driving in cars. But then they noticed that a lot of the community connections and a lot of the benefits that the city had previously experienced from being more walkable went away, and people were having more anxiety and negative symptoms in the city. So a lot of people who lived in the city partnered with some creative urban planners and policy people, and they ended up creating a campaign to change the way that the city worked. So they got rid of the 3-lane highway that had been surrounding the city, and then they reinstalled the canal, and they ended up kind of restoring the more walkable and locally oriented community. And then the survey ratings went totally in the opposite direction again, where people were happier and they reported being more connected with their community. And it was a really cool example that in basically a 20-year period, the city went through a total cycle of transformation. Because I think when I think about cities in the US, it's more of kind of a static thing where I assume if a city isn't walkable now, it's not going to be walkable in the future. But
Right.
there are oftentimes kind of little and cheap changes that you can make that can allow for more room for pedestrians and make things a little bit more friendly for people who do want to walk and encourage more of that community aspect.
So, Claire, what is your favorite spot to walk? You talked urban, you've got the farming. If you had your choice, what's your go-to walk?
That's a good question. So yeah, it really depends on where in the world I am. I would say I try to do at least an hour long walk every day just to clear my head and get some exercise in. Right now, I'm living near a place that's called Port Meadow in Oxford, so it's kind of on the edge of the city, and it's a huge field that is basically open livestock grazing. So there's every day kind of a new adventure of whether it's going to be cows or horses or any other kind of animal who's being grazed there. So I'll usually do like an hour and a half loop around the perimeter. And that's been a really lovely place to go. But it's a big change from the walks that I used to go on when I was in DC, where I was
Sure.
usually the one who was dodging between
Right.
cars and illegally jaywalking and yeah, making my way through the city.
So one of my things that I like to say when I'm trying to encourage people to walk is I say a walk on a treadmill is good, a walk outside is better, and a walk in nature is best. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that is out in the green areas, kind of like I think in Japan they call it forest bathing, getting really
Mm-hmm.
out there. But walking in the city can be super cool, especially if it's a city with architecture that is pretty and you can stare at that. And it's also great people watching,
Exactly.
so there's benefits of both of them. So it's really like, it would probably be best to do a combination of both of them, which sounds like what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been fun to kind of compare and contrast and now you're making me think think through it a little bit
Yeah.
differently. But the community piece is really interesting. They did some studies also in the Netherlands on loneliness in older people, and it didn't matter whether when people left the house they were actually having a conversation or talking to somebody, but it mattered if they saw people while they were out and about. So
Yeah.
oftentimes if somebody isn't working or doesn't have a family nearby, they might just be in their house all day and suffer from some kind of isolation. But if you get out and you go for a walk and you at least have a friendly smile with a stranger or get to see other people, then that really improves some of the metrics around loneliness and isolation.
Well, that's why they say people that have dogs and walk their dogs are
Mhm.
typically happier because they're outside. Like you said, they're not necessarily having a conversation, but they're seeing people and they're nodding, and there's a little bit of a community. You've got this passion for walking, passion for being outside. How does that move? How do you take that step? Like that one, Ty? You see that? Take that step into the farming piece of your life.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So,
And by the way, I think I've got more good questions than Ty so far, but we're not
and
keeping score.
more good puns as well. So I think there's a real connection between walking and agriculture. So it's all kind of part of this more holistic view of health. So part of why I got into the food system in the first place is because during COVID, I had this undiagnosed medical issue that me and my friends affectionately called mystery disease, where I was having a lot of fatigue and liver issues and stomach issues and just a bunch of random things that were happening. And I ended up going to, I think, 6 different specialists during the course of being treated for all of those issues as kind of unique things. And in my mind, I thought that they were related, but couldn't find a doctor or medical specialist who could kind of tie all of the different pieces together. Um, so then I ended up seeing a nutritionist who basically said, yeah, all of these issues are due to inflammation, and inflammation is kind of at the root of all of these issues that you're experiencing. So then I was able to work with her and improve kind of some of the ways that I was eating. I generally have stuck to whole foods and try to live a pretty healthy lifestyle, but she kind of opened my eyes to how our food is grown being really important, and not just focusing on kind of the macronutrients like the fats and the carbs and the proteins, but also thinking about micronutrients and making sure that there's a good diversity in the kinds of foods that we're eating. So it was going through that process and basically resolving a lot of my medical issues naturally that made me think, well, if I'm able to do this, then what would that look like if all of the people who are experiencing diabetes and autoimmune diseases could also have a similar approach to health that doesn't mean necessarily having to be on a pill for the rest of your life, but being able to address things more from a lifestyle change perspective.
So that's one of my big points with why we even started this kind of thing is that you figure that out on your own. We'd like to get that message out to people, but most of what we do in orthopedics, the chronic things are basically related to inflammation, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
tendonitis, arthritis, all those things. and your gut health and the kind of things you're eating are a huge role. So it's just very simply, sugar is a huge inflammation problem. And so starting off with sugar, finding out the foods that you might be sensitive to. And I
Mm,
think one of the sad things is when somebody's going through what you went through and they're like, oh, I'm going to clean up their diet. And they're like, I'm going to eat kale and broccoli. Well, what if they're sensitive to kale? You know, and
mm,
then their gut is unhealthy because they're sensitive to kale. It's a fascinating thing, but I tell everybody, once you have that first problem, it's like a warning signal. It's like a shot across
mm,
the bow, and clean up your diet, because you don't want to get surgery 10 times over a 10-year period for all these different inflammation problems. And it hits more in middle age when you get to be mine and Matt's age, where,
mm.
you get that first thing, like you get your carpal tunnel done, and then you need your other carpal tunnel, and then you need your rotator cuff. Matt already told you, talking about how he's falling apart. He had his shoulder and all those things. But I love how you figured that out on your own. Can you mention a little bit? I think you probably know about this, but I've heard about this. Is that as our soil is becoming less healthy, we're not getting
Mm,
as many nutrients out of our
mm.
vegetables and our fruits that maybe our grandparents did.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there's kind of three interrelated health issues that are going on at this point in time. So one is the human health dimension, another is the health of the farmers, the people who are growing the food, and connected to that is the soil health. So I'm sure, as you're aware, there's a huge number of people in the US who are struggling with obesity. So the number is greater than 40% at this point in time. And back in 1960, it was almost 10%, which means that there's been a huge increase over just a 60-year period. And at the same time, about a tenth of the population is dealing with diabetes, and a third on top of that is dealing with pre-diabetes, which means that there's an increased risk for diabetes in the future. There's also the related issues around ADHD in children, and just a lot of medical issues that weren't as prevalent 50 or 60 years ago. And I don't think it's a coincidence. This also coincides with when the US started to move towards more of an industrialized food system where food was being grown mechanically instead of more naturally. So there was a focus on more pesticides and more insecticides and herbicides, and basically spraying food to the point that everything around the food would die so that the food would be able to be produced as quickly and efficiently and as inexpensively as possible. So then to get to the second issue around farmer health, if farmers are growing in this kind of system, they face physical health issues themselves because they're exposed to all these toxic chemicals, and there's increased evidence that farmers have higher rates of Parkinson's disease, for example, and increased risk of cancer. And then it also leads to mental health issues for farmers who might have to deal with these pressures around producing really efficiently, but they might not have the support that they need to be healthy and fully well. Then from a soil health perspective, if we're growing in a way that depletes the soil of all of its nutrients and relies on basically killing everything but the plant, then that means the soil is going to have less nutrients in it, which translates to lower nutrient quality in our food. So if you look at kind of the way that soil is supposed to be, it's supposed to be crawling with earthworms and bugs, and it's supposed to be something that's alive. But a lot of the soil that we're seeing in the US is very much not alive. It looks dry and kind of worn out. So the idea around regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture more broadly is thinking about the ways that we can improve the health of the soil by farming. So there's often this bias, especially in the sustainability world, towards just conservation and setting aside land so that it can be preserved in that way. But the regenerative farming movement is saying, instead of taking land out of production and trying to just restore or conserve it, can we use farming as a way to restore the soil health? So then the food that we're eating becomes more nutritious, and there's greater biodiversity and health in our soils.
What do you mean by biodiversity?
It's a great question. It's sustainability jargon. So there's
Wait,
two.
let me reward myself real quick. Twizzler, go ahead.
So there's two types of biodiversity that I think about. So one is above ground, so thinking about the total number of plants and animals and insects that exists within a farm. So usually, if a system is conventional, birds aren't going to want to come to soil that doesn't have earthworms or caterpillars or any kind of food source in it. Then the other type of biodiversity is below ground. So there are, I'm not going to get the scientific data on this correctly, but I want to say there are millions of microbes in the soil that basically account for that living
Oh,
organism. And
definitely. Yeah.
all of those microbes are talking to each other and exchanging basically intelligence through the soil. But if the soil isn't alive in the way that it should be, then all of that conversation isn't going on, and that's going to disrupt both the health of the soil itself and then also what's happening above the soil.
So, how do you get this food from, say, your farmer's market? So, say there's a regenerative farm, and you imagine if you live near farmers markets, you can probably get some of this food. How do you get it to other areas? Like, how do you get it into a standard grocery store, not the, I kind of getting into a little bit of food deserts in America, like, and versus even just the point of getting any fruit and vegetables into these food deserts, and then
Mhm.
the next level up, how would you get the regenerative farmed fruits and vegetables into the food deserts?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a few issues when it comes to getting whole food into the distribution systems where it's needed. So, one of the first issues is that there isn't really a supply chain around regenerative agriculture. It's pretty new on the scene, at least in the way that it's been defined within the last 5 or 10 years. And there's an increasing case of farmers who are adopting regenerative practices, and they're seeing increased yields and having really great outcomes for the nutrition and the biodiversity impacts, but they can't get to market because there aren't really established marketplaces in the way that there might be for organic food. Um, One of the issues around organic food in the US, which is a little bit different from regenerative agriculture, organic is defined as any chemical free cultivation. So it means that chemicals aren't used as part of the growing process, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's this added focus on soil health. So it's really just about getting the bad stuff out, but not necessarily about putting the good stuff back in. So I like to think about regenerative agriculture as kind of a step above, where it's focused on not just removing the bad stuff, but increasing the amount of good stuff, kind of in the way that we would think about gut health as well. So the issue with organic produce has been that it usually comes with a price premium. So it's really great if you have disposable income. It's really great if you shop at Whole Foods or somewhere that sells organic produce, but that's not always the case. So what you mentioned around food deserts, there's definitely an issue where communities, especially low income communities, don't have the same kind of access to whole grown foods. There's a lot more convenience stores and places that are selling processed food, which taste really good because they're salty and full of sugar, but they really train people to be addicted to them rather than filling with nutrients that satiate. So it means that people are often over consuming or are not receiving the full amount of nutrients that they need to be able to survive or thrive. So, particularly in low income neighborhoods, the patterns around food deserts often have to do with historical spending. And if a neighborhood hasn't spent in a grocery store or hasn't provided evidence that there could be profitability if the grocery store were to come into that neighborhood, then grocery stores, especially ones that sell whole foods, will systematically not come to that neighborhood. So then that results in issues where families and children in particular aren't receiving the nutrients that they need. And it also extends to
Vicious
the school
cycle. I mean, it's
systems.
a real vicious cycle, right?
Yeah,
If they can't afford it, we're not coming there, but we're not coming there because we can't afford it.
exactly. Yeah, and there's a question of how do we make sure that it's affordable and accessible and Yeah, I think the piece around schools is also really interesting because the schools that are more well funded are typically the ones that are experimenting with bringing regeneratively grown food into the school system. And there's usually parents who are being really strong advocates for whole foods, but that's not necessarily the case in lower funded school districts where
Are there
they might already
school
be tight.
are there school districts that their food source is regenerative in the
Yeah,
U.S. or
there's some really amazing places in Denver, Colorado, for example. There's a project that basically matches regenerative farms with schools. So the kids get to go to the schools and they get to take tours and kind of see how their food is grown. And then they also get to do participatory meal planning. So one of the things I went to a conference in Denver and we got to tour this facility, and the kids were basically thinking about how can we use cauliflower and other vegetables and make things that are more appealing to kids like nacho cheese. But actually use the cauliflower to create a more healthy version of a nacho. So it was kind of meeting the kids where they are, but also making it a lot more healthy than if you just used kind of the basic cheese products.
And it's interesting. There's some stat that like the public school system in America buys more French fries than any restaurant or any McDonald's or Burger King, or maybe they're the biggest buyer of junk food in the world. And if you could switch that over to basically get at least the kids healthy food in these food deserts,
Mm.
that would be a great start. And that seems like something that is a doable thing with effort. I mean, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but I'm thinking from an orthopedic standpoint.
Mm.
I've trained in Baltimore City and I practiced in Baltimore City for a little bit. You tell somebody, hey, you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic, you need to eat this, this, and this. Well, that's pretty tough when the only place you're getting your food is 7-Eleven. There's no Whole Foods there. And it's such an interesting concept. And I see people talking about it. I hear about it in podcasts. And I think that's where it starts is with conversations. Pay me now or pay me later. Like pay a little bit more for the elementary schools and the high schools and the middle schools to have a better lunch program, and you'll save off on money on medicines and
Mm-hmm.
everything down the road.
Yeah,
makes
I
sense?
love that. And
Make,
there's been some really exciting legislation that was put in place recently in Oklahoma. So it's called the Food as Medicine Act, and it was passed just within the last month or two. And it basically says that families with Medicare or Medicaid can now use that money to buy organically or whole foods rather than using medicine as kind of the traditional approach. So I think getting more of
Oh
the
wow.
kind of laws in place would be an amazing way to make it more accessible for all people to be able to access whole foods and
so
do it affordably.
that kind of answers my next question, which was it takes the first step, to change the world. How do people locally start advocating for this kind of farming and this kind of substances?
Yeah. I'll share my perspective and then I'm
Yes,
I'm
please.
curious to hear what you all think too. Um, I think the first step is just learning. So it wasn't until I had to go really deep from a kind of selfish and personal health perspective until I learned just how bad the food system is currently. Because I was eating, let's say, kale, broccoli from the grocery store, and I thought that what I was eating was really healthy because it was a whole food and it was green and it looked nice, but I wasn't usually buying organic and it was probably sprayed with a ton of pesticides, and I definitely don't wash my produce properly. So I think oftentimes it takes kind of getting to that moment where things are going really wrong to have to figure out how can we reverse this and make it better. So that's definitely where I got from my personal health perspective. But I think the more that people are kind of curious about where their food comes from, the more grocery stores are going to have to start answering that question
Right.
and be more transparent about how the food was grown, if there were chemicals that were part of the process, and kind of how far the food traveled to get to the grocery store shelf. And I think what you mentioned too already around looking for local farmers is really important because there are probably people in, I don't know, a 20-mile radius who are growing locally and might have food available through a CSA or community supported agriculture program, which I think is a really cool model where you can pay in advance for a season, basically however much you want, and then you'll get a portion of the produce that's grown at that farm.
Mm.
So then you're kind of giving the farmer security that they'll be able to have access to an income, and it takes a little bit of the pressure off, and then you get just a huge amount of produce that's totally fresh and kind of ready to go.
Yeah.
So where do you envision, like, what would be your dream for what your career is related to all this stuff 10
Mm-hmm.
years from now, say 20 years from now? Like, what would be your, I know you don't have a magic ball, but what would be your dream?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the thing that's missing and kind of common in what we're talking about, both from a walkability and a food perspective, is that connection is missing. I think to generalize, we've gotten really comfortable with just being removed from how things are made, where things are grown, who our neighbors are, how policy is getting made, anything of that nature. And I think creating more of a community around food and around walking and around just kind of a culture of genuine support is an exciting vision for the world. So I think that becomes a little bit more concrete with initiatives around like getting locally grown food into schools, and that helps combat farmer loneliness and make sure that school children kind of spend time on farms and understand how food is made. And it helps kids be more healthy and perform better on their exams and be more focused and concentrated. So I think those kind of locally driven initiatives are things that I'm really excited about. And then making sure that once something succeeds at the local level, getting it written into policies so that, like with the act in Oklahoma, it can get replicated in other states or districts or other parts of the world.
And to emphasize the little kid thing, Matt and I are both high energy, and I think we spent a lot of time on the principal's couch when we were in elementary school. And I think
True
a
story.
component of that is that we were all jacked up on sugar, and it wasn't our mom's fault. We thought we were eating healthy, but we were getting orange juice and a cereal and a Pop Tart. And if we had had healthy farmed food from a farmer's market and organic eggs and all that stuff, I think we would still have been on the principal's couch, but maybe not quite as much.
100%.
Luckily, we turned it around. So, Matt, do you have
did.
any more farming questions? Because I do want to touch on a couple walking things again.
I think everything Clara said is so spot on, and it's in English, right? It's very simple, and it makes sense. I understand there's a financial aspect to it, but it resonates. It resonates. So if I can find some regenerative Twizzlers, I'm in.
And I also think that
Thank you.
it's pretty obvious that now there's large groups of very different and diverse people who want healthy food. People are demanding it, and people are really starting to link their health problems to our food from all different political spectrums. And I think that's how you pass these things that make our diets healthier.
Yeah.
So my food question, my walking question was,
do you like to walk and eat at the same time? Is that what it's going to be?
No, this is a serious. What are some of the challenges that women have in walking?
Ooh, this is a good question. Where do we start? So
and I have two experiences with this that's why I want to talk about the subject.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring it up. I would say from an immediate perspective, there is a danger that comes with being a woman, especially if you're a woman walking alone, especially in an urban environment, especially if it's late at night and there aren't a lot of other people around. So there's kind of an insecurity that can come along with being a woman walking, and there's a lot of stats that tell you that it is inherently less safe to walk as a woman. I think there's also kind of a global dimension to it where in different parts of the world, people are walking for different reasons. So, for example, in parts of rural Africa where women are still the primary people who are responsible for getting water to their community or to their village, it involves a really long walk with a really heavy load, oftentimes of 1 to 2 hours a day to be able to get to a fresh water source. So along those journeys, it can be dangerous because there could be people with bad intentions who are waiting for a woman and could result in really negative experiences for those women. So I think it's part of the issue is raising awareness about the different kinds of issues that women are facing around the world, and then working together to create a culture where there's less antagonism towards other people and more support and kind of systematic solutions to improve the ways that women are interacting with the world through walking. Like even just adding street lighting can be something that's really impactful. Just making sure that there's light while people are walking home, so it creates more visibility and less risk of bad things that might happen in the dark.
So the reason I brought it up is my daughter, who is 25, is a big walker, and she lives in San Antonio and has great places to walk. She was born in Galveston, Texas, so she grew up walking on their seawall, which is on the Gulf of Mexico. My wife trained for marathons, pushing her in a stroller. It's a great place to walk, but she lived there before she moved to San Antonio. She lived there for 4 years while her husband was in medical school, and she couldn't walk because of basically she felt uncomfortable guys hanging out on the seawall, basically catcalling. And you think about it, you're like, it's so sad that I doubt even they necessarily had horrible intentions. They just didn't realize how uncomfortable they made her. And the reason it's relevant is she might be moving back there for my son-in-law's next stage of his medical training. So it's kind of like, hey, that comment that you think is funny, you might literally be ruining that woman's exercise routine. She might not walk again because of that.
Yeah,
and
it's
then
an unfortunate reality.
There's also unique problems with men walking, is that you look around and you'll see women in different neighborhoods walking and talking and having a great time. You ask guys to walk. The reason I walk with Matt is he's the only guy that'll walk. Like if I say, hey, let's go play basketball, let's go play golf, let's go mountain biking, I have 5 guys who want to come. Walking, they're like, what do you want to walk for? That's weird. And it's a great way to have meetings even. We got to meet for 45 minutes. Why don't we walk? And it was such a great way. You got your workout in and you got the business done at the same time.
Amazing.
And your mind works differently when you're walking. Back to what Clara was saying about the creativity, as you're walking.
Again, from the orthopedic perspective, for athletes maybe who have had an injury, when you get to be middle-aged, it's funny. Sometimes you can run or bike or swim or play a sport and you're pain-free. Sometimes walking, because of some of your old injuries, can be somewhat painful. But if you concentrate on your posture, you can eliminate a lot of that walking pain. So just pay attention. If you're hunched over, if you have a weird gait, if you don't have good shoes, you can fix a lot of that stuff just by working on your posture.
Okay.
So how do you think we get more men to walk?
I think basically kind of like tell them you can listen to music, you can listen to a podcast. Right. The 2 miles you walk is better than the 4 miles that you don't run. And those same arguments that men have arguing about who's better, LeBron James or Michael Jordan, you can do that while you're walking. So before we sign off, give us a book recommendation.
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say usually whatever book I've read most recently becomes my favorite. And I've been on a big audiobook kick recently with all of the walking. So there's a book called What If We Get It Right? Which is by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who is a marine biologist. And she's basically taken a look at all of the issues that we've got going on right now, whether it's food security, climate change, ocean wellness. And she's kind of changed the narrative where usually it's pretty negative, talking about all of the problems and making people feel kind of overwhelmed about everything that's going on. But she's kind of reframed the narrative and said, what if we get it right? How could we think about a future where we have more of a local economy, where people are supporting each other instead of opposing each other, where there's more investment in kind of local fisheries and food systems and education. So it's been a really inspirational.
Absolutely.
That sounds great to learn from more of an optimistic point of view. So you don't ruin your walk with increasing your stress while you're listening to that on Audible. Right. Do you have a podcast that you listen to when you walk? That's your favorite one?
Come on.
A new recommendation. So there's one called Investing in Regenerative Agriculture.
Okay.
I'm very single-minded in my interest. So it's a guy based in the Netherlands, and he's done, at this point, I think 400 episodes with different people who are part of the food system, both in Europe and in the US, thinking about how we can get more investment into local food systems and make it appealing for investors to get a return by investing in food systems. And I was actually at a conference last week in the UK called Groundswell that started out with, I think they had 500 attendees in their first year. That was 10 years ago. And now, 10 years later, they're up to 10,000 attendees.
Wow.
And the Prince William made an appearance. So I think it shows the kind of momentum that's happening around regenerative agriculture right now. It's been exciting.
And then my final question is, do you listen to music when you walk? And if so, what is your favorite song on your walking playlist right now?
I do listen to music when I walk. My friends and family will make fun of me because I'm also pretty single-minded in my musical interests. Taylor Swift is a recurring artist.
You can walk with us anytime.
Yeah.
I'm
I thought you were going to say like walking on sunshine or something.
Yeah. Awesome.
I should have.
Yeah. Oh, all good. Clara, you gave us a lot of good stuff, a lot of good nuggets to think about. And I'm excited to see what's coming down the pike for all of this that you're so interested in and passionate about. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great to learn from you all, and I'm excited to keep listening to the show.
And let us know when you write your next book also.
I will. Coming soon.